everyone, and welcome back to the FAI Wire. My name is Gabe. It is good to be back with you. And as always, there's a lot to catch up on that has occurred over the last couple of weeks in the Middle East, especially related to the Israel-Gaza war. My usual disclaimer, if you want to keep up with events and analysis related to the Middle East and North Africa and the greater Muslim world on the daily, you can do so by following The Wire on that social media platform formerly known as Twitter, today known as X, as in the letter X.com. Our handle there is at FAI_wire. Follow us there for daily, sometimes hourly updates and analysis, the occasional snarky comment or meme to keep you going throughout the day. So top story, obviously, is related to ongoing events in the Israel-Gaza conflict, especially around the Gaza front. As of the taping of this episode of The Wire, which is Friday, November 24th, in the middle of the day or so, there has now been officially about 6 to 7 hours of a ceasefire in effect. That ceasefire went into effect at 7 a.m. Israeli time. Shortly after that, within a few hours, both Hamas and Israel took the first steps of the ceasefire to release prisoners on the Israeli side, hostages on the Gaza side. Israel released 39 Palestinian prisoners. These are convicted criminals, mostly convicted of attempted violent acts or other means of subversion. They are not criminals who had actually been successful in committing murder against Israelis, but had, in many cases, attempted to do so, either through stabbing attacks or shooting attacks or some other form of terrorist attack or throwing Molotov cocktails or other forms of incitement against Israelis. 39, as I said, were released today from Israeli prisons, transferred back to Gaza. Hamas, a little late, but eventually did release 25 hostages. There were 13 Israeli citizens that were released, including some elderly and young children. Also, 11 Thai nationals and one Filipino national who were laborers in the Gaza envelope on October 7th when they were taken hostage by Hamas. Many of you know, if you've been following along with the war, that Hamas both murdered, including in very grotesque ways, several Thai laborers and caregivers who lived in the Gaza envelope, and also kidnapped about a dozen others. So it wasn't just Israelis that suffered that day, but also nationals who were in the Gaza envelope for the music festival or as laborers or visitors. So 25, it looks like altogether, were released today by Hamas. No American citizens released. We'll talk about that more in a minute. The hostages were transported by the International Red Cross, who so far has not been involved at all in advocating for or even trying to get information about the hostages from Hamas, as far as we know. They were selected to transport the hostages from where Hamas released them in the Gaza Strip to the Rafah border crossing on the border of Israel and Egypt, from whence they were retrieved and returned to Israel. Egypt often plays the intermediary between Hamas and Israel, has done so for decades, and so this was the evacuation route, so to speak, for the hostages. So this is day one of the at least 4-day ceasefire. Thankfully, the hostages were released as scheduled. Hamas is supposed to have already released the names of the next batch of hostages to be released tomorrow. Hopefully that will have happened and the hostages will have been released by the time this episode of The Wire drops and you're watching it. As you're watching it, hopefully more hostages have been released. We shall see. This is undoubtedly a good thing in that hostages are starting to be released. At the same time, it represents challenges and its own pitfalls. And this is well known to everybody involved. On the Israeli side, on both sides of the Israeli aisles, so to speak, on the left and the right side of the Knesset and in the international community, that on one hand, what could be seen as the major Israeli objective of recovering hostages is beginning to be realized. On the other hand, the major objective of this war is being hampered, which is to eradicate Hamas from the Gaza Strip. Israel had great momentum and great success so far, just about 3 weeks into the ground invasion since October 27th. They had completely encircled and then closed in on Gaza City. Hamas has, for the most part, completely lost control of Gaza City, the largest city in the Gaza Strip. Many of you last week saw footage of the Israeli military after intense negotiations with the staff of Al-Shifa Hospital, which is the largest hospital in the Gaza Strip. After several days of trying to negotiate for the evacuation of patients inside the hospital, which Hamas refused to allow, the Israelis began their operation to clear Al-Shifa Hospital and then the tunnels underneath of Hamas. The tunnels underneath Hamas were believed by both Israeli intelligence and Western intelligence to be the center of the Hamas terrorist organization in Gaza City. It's taken a few days to find the tunnels and carefully and methodically clear them of booby traps. Obviously, any kind of explosion underneath the hospital is not only going to affect the Israeli soldiers operating in the area, but also patients and hospital staff directly above the tunnels in the hospital complex. So they've very carefully and cautiously and prudently taken their time locating the tunnels, breaching them, and beginning to clear them. And we're beginning to get a better picture of the very extensive network of tunnels that were siphoning electricity and fuel and water from the hospital above it to the Hamas fighters below it. Also, weapons found inside the hospital, including in the MRI room. Seems like maybe not the wisest place to keep your Kalashnikov rifles, but that's Hamas's MO. And thankfully, the Israeli military has now completed that operation at the hospital, is beginning to pull back. They have negotiated the evacuation of premature newborns and the very sick and very injured from all hospitals in Gaza to either southern Gaza or Egypt or some into Turkey or in other places. So Israel on the ground in Gaza for 3 weeks has already done far more for Palestinian patients in Gaza hospitals than Hamas ever did. And we're all glad to see that both Israelis and Palestinians in Gaza are beginning to benefit from Israel's presence on the ground in the Strip. I mentioned earlier that none of the hostages released today, none of the 13 hostages released, were American citizens or American dual citizens. There's an intentional reason for that. There's a method in Hamas's madness in that Hamas knows that the United States is Israel's biggest partner and greatest source of diplomatic pressure on the Jewish state. And so by not releasing American hostages, Hamas keeps the pressure up on the United States to continue the ceasefire, and the United States, in turn, through the Biden administration, keeps up pressure on Israel to continue the ceasefire. The 4-day ceasefire ostensibly could be longer, as Hamas has offered to continue to release hostages after the 4 days are up more on a daily basis in order to extend the ceasefire beyond 4 days to an indeterminate amount of time, releasing an indeterminate amount of hostages. So at least 50 or so hostages to begin with in the first 4 days, but then we're still talking about almost 200 hostages remaining. At least 3 of those hostages are now deceased. Ironically, one of the hostages released today is an elderly woman in her 70s who Islamic Jihad had previously lied about dying during Israeli airstrikes. Come to find out, no, she didn't really die in the airstrike. She's alive and has been released. And so that's just one example of how we see that Hamas and Islamic Jihad have been using the hostages to fight a form of psychological warfare against the Israelis and Western world by lying, by withholding the names of the hostages that they're going to release. They should have already released the names of the hostages that are going to be evacuated tomorrow. They have not done that yet. So they're keeping the Israelis and their families, the families of the hostages, and the Western world on pins and needles, trying to make this whole process as grueling and painful and difficult as it can possibly be. So while also still holding several children, including a couple of infants. So Hamas did not begin by releasing the youngest and most vulnerable of the hostages. They are also not releasing intact families. So maybe a mom and daughter gets released, but not the father or other siblings. And of course, the tactic there is that as long as the other family members are still inside Gaza, that family is going to be intimidated into not publicly speaking about their experience in the Gaza Strip with Hamas or giving information about Hamas, at least publicly, as long as their loved ones are still being held hostage inside. So Hamas acting very shrewdly in a very cruel way as the ceasefire continues. But at least for now, we do see some hostages coming out. That is a good thing. At least for now, the daily rocket fire into the Gaza envelope and into the greater Tel Aviv area has stopped. That is also a good thing. The Israeli government has already promised that this is not the end of the war, and at whatever point the ceasefire ends, they will resume operations in the Gaza Strip. It looks like they have already prepared for and have begun ramping up for the next phase of the conflict, which will be in the city of Khan Yunis, the other major city in the Gaza Strip, considered by many to be really the heart of Hamas, more so than even Gaza City. That's where the majority of Hamas fighters who have fled Gaza City went to. That's where the majority of rocket launchers are still located. And it is undoubtedly where Hamas would make a last stand inside the Gaza Strip anyhow. So Israel vowing to continue the war. However, the pause gives Hamas a diplomatic and tactical advantage militarily. It's kind of like, in a baseball game or a tennis match or whatever, when one team or one player is doing really, really well, what the other side tries to do is call timeout or pause or do whatever they can to slow the other side down to kind of kill their momentum. And that is exactly what Hamas is doing by strategically agreeing to release a percentage of the hostages, is attempting to slow down the momentum that the Israeli military has had in Gaza. First of all, give themselves a chance to recuperate, regroup. Part of the deal is also supplies, including fuel, being transported into Gaza, so giving them a chance to refuel. Obviously, fuel needed for rockets and other and generators and other things that Hamas needs to continue fighting the war. So it gives them a chance to catch their breath, and this kind of pause diplomatically on the world stage increases the voices and the seeming legitimacy for the ceasefire to continue. In other words, well, now that we're in a ceasefire, why continue the war? There's no legitimate reason to continue the war anymore, as long as Hamas is kind of slowly releasing hostages in onesies, twosies for who knows how long, or, promising this or that through Qatar and their other diplomatic back channels. The idea is to slow down the war to a halt and maybe keep a foothold in places like Khan Yunis and the refugee settlements and other places in the southern Gaza Strip. This is certainly Iran's tactic. The role of Iran in this, as we've talked about previously on The Wire, is undeniable. Interestingly, the 12 Thai laborers that were released because the Thai government, representatives from the Thai government, went to Iran and appealed to the Iranian government. And within 24 hours, there was an announcement that Hamas was going to release all the Thai workers. So that makes it very clear who's pulling the strings behind the scenes for Hamas, for Hezbollah, for Islamic Jihad. It is their patrons in Tehran, the Ayatollahs. And so, Iran is still very much playing the long game. Meanwhile, Israel at least appears to still be preparing for operations in Khan Yunis, warning civilians to flee from known Hamas positions, to find shelter. The airstrikes have stepped up, or had stepped up anyway until this morning. And so we shall see. Some have described the conflict between Iran and Israel as what happens when an unstoppable force meets an immovable object. That is, Iran being the unstoppable force and Israel being the immovable object. Iran turning the screws diplomatically and militarily in every way they can, while Israel refusing to budge on their top two objectives for this war. A great thread that we retweeted on X the other day looked at the internal political dynamics in Israel right now for Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu and his war cabinet as they kind of navigate the different political perspectives in their own country. Obviously, the more hawkish members of his cabinet on the right, including both religious Zionists and secular Zionists, a conservative secular Zionist in his Likud party, prioritize the eradication of Hamas, while those on the left prioritize more over the war or over the eradication of Hamas, the rescue of the hostages. So Bibi and his cabinet have had to thread a very thin needle in attempting to meet both of those objectives that at times are aligned with one another. That is, the better the war went, the more pressure Israel could put on Hamas to begin talking about releasing hostages. So we're only seeing these 50 hostages released today because of the fact that Israel did so well in the first 3 weeks of the ground invasion. At the same time, when it comes to actually releasing hostages and negotiating a ceasefire, then those two objectives can be at odds with one another. That is, you take the ceasefire and the release of your men, women, and children at the expense of the momentum and the potential success of the military campaign. So internal dynamics in Israel also very much a part of these decisions and what we see happening on the ground. So that's Gaza. Going north to the Lebanese and Golan front. As we've been reporting since the beginning of the war on October 7th, we still see happening today. Very slow, gradual ratcheting up of pressure on the northern front. Daily rocket and explosive drone attacks coming across the border from Hezbollah and Palestinian positions in southern Lebanon into Israel. Keep in mind also that Hamas and Islamic Jihad and other Palestinian militant organizations like the PFLP, the Palestinian Front for the Liberation of Palestine, or the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. All those groups are also in Lebanon, have been in Lebanon since the 1970s, and work together with Hezbollah. They're sometimes Hezbollah's junkyard dogs, and shooting rockets into Israel, giving Hezbollah that kind of layer, a buffer layer. They're the proxy of the proxy, so to speak. So all of those groups still operating in southern Lebanon, firing rockets and drones into Israel on a daily basis. Um, I think we saw last Hezbollah launched 20 drones from southern Lebanon towards Israel. 19 of them landed inside southern Lebanon, didn't even make it across the border. So a phenomenon that we see very often played out in Gaza, which is that somewhere between 10 and 20% of Gazan rockets don't make it into Israel, actually land inside the Gaza Strip, causing damage and casualties, also happening in Lebanon. But those rockets that do make it across the border, or drones that make it across the border, many are intercepted. Israel's Iron Dome and David Sling systems are there. Sometimes the rockets make it across Israeli defenses and cause damage, even sometimes casualties, especially when striking Israeli military outposts and bases that are targeted, including a base just south of the town of Kiryat Shimona that was struck the other day, causing major damage. Israel responding on a daily basis with airstrikes and artillery strikes and tank fire across the border against Hezbollah position. So far, just in southern Israel, they haven't gone northward into cities like Tyre or Beirut yet. They've publicly announced that they would reserve that kind of action for an all-out war with Hezbollah. Still, there's a very limited conflict there just along the border, and so both sides appear not to want it to escalate any further beyond that. But there are casualties, and it is significant. Almost 80 members of Hezbollah have been killed since October 7th. For a perspective, that's more than a third, approaching half of the number of members of Hezbollah that were killed during the last Israeli-Lebanese war in 2006, almost 2 decades ago. So this is very much a war going on the northern front. It's a war zone. With casualties that are approaching what we saw the last time Israel and Hezbollah were in an all-out war. And that is partly because it's dragging into a war of attrition over the period of weeks, and has slowly but steadily ratcheted up in intensity. Despite that, it would seem that Hezbollah does not want an all-out confrontation with Israel, at least not yet. But nonetheless, their attacks have killed 6 members of the IDF and 3 Israeli civilians. Most of the cities, thankfully, in northern Israel have been evacuated. Over 60 of them have been. I think I saw somewhere around 500,000 Israelis have been evacuated from their homes and are living as guests or with friends or family members, or those who have offered to open their homes across the country. So when you consider there's somewhere around 7 million Jewish people living in Israel and 500,000 of them are displaced by the war, that gives you an idea of the upheaval happening in Israeli society right now. 14 Lebanese civilians have been killed so far, including 3 journalists who were reporting from the northern front. Also should mention that almost 70 Israeli soldiers, I think the last I saw was 68 or 69 Israeli soldiers, have been killed in Gaza on the ground since the ground incursion began almost 3 weeks ago on October 27th. So casualties continue to mount on both sides. As everyone knew they would, that's why Israel waited as long as it did to go into Gaza on the ground, because the last time it did so in 2014, almost 10 years ago, for Operation Protective Edge, it was a very costly war that included Israeli soldiers, 2 Israeli soldiers, as I remember, being kidnapped, and their remains are held in Gaza to this day. So Israel had avoided a ground incursion into Gaza for 10 years and had put up with almost annual rocket fire, barrages of rocket fire from Hamas. It was almost a yearly thing around Ramadan for the past few years. And then obviously October 7th was the last straw. So that's what we see happening inside of Israel. In the region, several dynamics that we've reported on already are continuing to play out and unfold, and we're seeing more and more how October 7th was, like September 11th, 2001, very much a watershed moment in history. And that is the dynamics of in the international community, let alone in the Middle East, have completely shifted. There have been seismic shifts across the world, and things will never be the same that they were before October 7th. And we're just beginning to see how those dynamics are starting to play out. One important way that they're beginning to play out is the shift in thought in the Arab world, both friendly and antagonistic towards Israel in regards to the issue of the Israeli-Palestinian peace process or so-called peace process and the two-state solution. With many friendly Arab governments, such as Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, and even not so much publicly, but behind the scenes in Jordan and Egypt, everyone agreeing that there cannot be a future for Hamas in Gaza. Agreeing that Hamas has to go, and maybe there even needs to be a leadership change in the Palestinian Authority, especially in regards to Mahmoud Abbas, who has been the president of the Palestinian Authority ever since the death of his predecessor, Yasser Arafat. There has not been a presidential election in the Palestinian Authority in almost 20 years. And Abbas is now in his mid-80s. And is obviously the Palestinian Authority and the Fatah party, once seen as the major peace partner of Israel and the means by which Israel would achieve a two-state solution with the Palestinians, now is largely seen as being completely ineffective and impotent, even to not only in Gaza, which obviously Fatah hasn't had any power in Gaza since 2006, when Hamas took over the Gaza Strip, but even in the West Bank, where Hamas and Islamic Jihad and the more radical elements of the Fatah party, such as Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade, have worked together to really co-opt entire Palestinian cities, such as Jenin and Nablus. And so, very much so in the Arab world, there is a growing consensus, and in the Western world, there is a growing consensus that there needs to be new Palestinian leadership in order for a true Israeli-Palestinian peace deal to be hammered out. How that's going to come to fruition is anybody's guess, but that is just the undercurrent, the sea change that we begin to see happening as a result of this war, is that that really the Oslo framework, if it wasn't dead already, it was on life support, and October 7th was the coup de grace, was the fatal head wound of that framework. So, within those dynamics, we're also seeing continuing increase in I guess we could say, I don't want to say war or military conflict, but is almost a Cold War that is beginning to break out in the Middle East. We've talked in the past about this dynamic of the northern Arab states that are, and Iran, which is not an Arab state, but is a Muslim state. The northern states, which are antagonistic towards Israel, and the southern states that are friendly towards Israel, at least diplomatically. And what we're beginning to see, especially vis-a-vis Iran and its proxies in the region, is a sort of Cold War that involves not only Israel and Iran, but also the United States and Iran, um, uh, American partners in Syria and Kurdistan and Iraq, specifically the Syrian Democratic Forces um, and other partners in Iraqi Kurdistan. All of these different parts of the tinderbox, which have been laying dry for many years, are beginning to catch sparks from the war in Gaza. So far, Iran has claimed, at least publicly, in fact, their foreign minister came out on Iranian TV last week and said that they have communicated with the United States through third parties and back channels that they don't want an open military conflict in the Middle East. And they don't want the Gaza war to escalate. Now, you can't take anything Iran says at face value, but in a sense, that's true. Iran has not been willing to risk open conflict with the United States and with Israel, most importantly because it knows that it would ultimately lose in that kind of conflict. It does not have the ability to march its army into Israel. And although Iran has a large short and medium range missile arsenal, both inside Iran and in southern Lebanon via its proxy Hezbollah, that's about all it has that can threaten Israeli cities or American bases in the Middle East or European countries or whoever it might target. It doesn't have a formidable air force. It doesn't have nearly the intelligence apparatus that the Western world or Israel has, which is highlighted by the fact that the Mossad has been running rampant in Iran, sabotaging nuclear sites and assassinating Iranian nuclear scientists for years, and the Iranians haven't been able to stop them. So Iran, although it is an apocalyptic jihadist regime, it is nonetheless at least self-aware enough to know that it could not win in open conflict with the West, with the ships of Qatim, so to speak, and with Israel, and especially if other Arab states were involved. And so it much prefers this kind of slow burn, this Cold War where it uses its proxies in Iraq or Syria or Yemen, who are the Houthis, or in the Palestinian territories or in Lebanon to fight by 1,000 paper cuts, so to speak. A Chinese water torture, dripping rockets and drones across the region without an all-out, all-in conflict. The other big thing that Iran is concerned about is its ongoing nuclear program. And it knows in an open war, those would be some of the first sites targeted inside Iranian territory. Iran is fairly close to having, I think the last I saw, Iran has enough highly enriched fissile material to build at least 3 nuclear weapons, according to the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency. That is at least that we know of. So that's uranium enriched to at least 60%, which could quickly, within a matter of a week or so, be enriched to 90%, which is weapons-grade uranium. It has enough of that material to build at least 3 nuclear weapons. But it's believed anyway, in intelligence circles, that it doesn't quite have the design or construction of a nuclear bomb down. You can have the material, but you also need the bomb to set it off. And it's believed that Iran isn't quite there yet. So, again, Iran playing the long game. Its ultimate prize is a nuclear weapon. And so, my interpretation of why Iran hasn't gone all in on this conflict, why it's been willing to let Hamas hang out to dry in some ways, and not use its ace in the hole, so to speak, which would definitely be Hezbollah and its missile arsenal, is because it wants to maintain that deterrence against an Israeli airstrikes against its nuclear sites. That's its ultimate prize, and that's its end game, is to have a nuke. So, well, I shouldn't say that's Iran's end game is ultimately to destroy Israel and usher in the 12th Imam, but that's a teaching for another day. Its short-term end game, I should say, is a nuke. So, it's been slowly using its proxies, slowly raising the temperature around the region. The Houthis in Yemen last week hijacked a merchant vessel owned by a British firm that was operated by Japan, flying Japanese flags, so nothing to do with Israel. But it was in the Red Sea, in international waters. The Houthis intercepted it with a helicopter and went in and took the crew hostage. Unclear how that helps Hamas in its war against Israel, but it's definitely the Houthis trying to flex their muscles and show that they're not a bunch of ragtag rebels. And they have also just recently again launched several kamikaze drones towards Israel that were once again intercepted by the U.S. Navy. A destroyer named USS Thomas Hudner, which is a destroyer that has precision-guided anti-missile systems, intercepted all of those drones. So far, the Houthis have been fairly ineffective in this conflict, despite declaring war on Israel. And again, haven't gone all in. I have been surprised by the fact that they haven't reignited their conflict with Saudi Arabia yet. There's been sort of a tenuous ceasefire with Saudi Arabia across the border from Yemen for about a year now. That has so far held for the most part. Just could be that Iran doesn't want to open another front in the war yet. And Saudi Arabia definitely doesn't want to have to get itself re-embroiled in that conflict. The Saudi Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman, is definitely playing the mediator in this conflict between Israel and the Palestinians, has been doing so since before the war, and recently hosted a summit of Arab leaders in Riyadh, which was ultimately unfruitful because obviously there were some Arab states that were, that are friendly towards Israel and others weren't, and they couldn't come to an agreement. But it nonetheless it shows MBS's, as he's called, determination to set himself at the forefront, at least diplomatically and politically, of the Muslim world in the Middle East and North Africa. Vis-a-vis Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, who's been much more publicly antagonistic towards Israel, but who at the same time has made these sort of offers to send troops to act as peacekeepers in the Gaza Strip, which obviously Israel would not accept. So Erdogan always speaks out of both sides of his mouth. He's the Islamist and also the peace activist all at the same time. MBS taking a much more moderate, Western-friendly, Israeli-friendly tactic, at least so far in this conflict. And of course, the only thing that's certain about the Middle East is that nothing is certain and everything could change in a matter of a day. But that is how we've seen the tectonic plates beginning to shift in the Middle East. So I think it's important to point out that despite the fact that Iranian proxies have committed at least I think I saw last 62 or 63 separate attacks on U.S. military installations in northeast Syria and northern Iraqi Kurdistan. Despite that, the United States military response has been very, very subdued. Undoubtedly, the Biden administration is doing its best to minimize the potential for a regional conflict. At least that is their goal in this sort of restraint. Thankfully, there have not been any American military deaths so far, although dozens of U.S. military personnel have been injured, mostly by concussions and other traumatic brain injuries in these rocket and drone strikes against military bases. Thankfully, none killed so far. The United States, however, last week did ratchet up the pressure a little bit on these proxy groups with airstrikes against Kataib Hezbollah, which was you might recognize as one of the major players in Iraq. Has been around for a few years. Was founded by, directly sponsored, armed, trained, financed by Iran. Is part of the Iran PMUs, popular mobilization units, that were formed to fight against ISIS in 2014, known in Arabic as Hashd al-Shabi. Kataib Hezbollah, on the spectrum of those militias, is very Iran pro-leaning, very antagonistic towards the United States, has attacked U.S. military bases on several occasions going back to the Trump administration. In fact, President Trump ordered several airstrikes against Kataib Hezbollah back in 2020, in 2019, 2020, 2021. So the Biden administration striking Kataib Hezbollah, causing multiple casualties, also striking Iranian-sponsored militias in eastern Syria near Deir ez-Zor and al-Bukamal over the last couple of weeks has had some effect, but in each case, those militias have immediately responded with additional attacks on those bases. In fact, after the Kataib Hezbollah attack on Wednesday, on Thursday, they attacked a U.S. military base in Al-Anbar province in western Iraq, both with rockets and with ground forces. There was an attempt to breach the fence at the base. So that's definitely an escalation over what we've seen, and the United States has so far definitely not established deterrence with these groups, whether it intends to do that or not. So that is, for the most part, what we see happening in the region. Internationally, we saw Geert Wilders, a very right-wing, anti-Muslim, not just anti-Islamist, but anti-Muslim political figure in the Netherlands, get a very large share of seats in the Dutch parliament in elections last week. Whether he's going to be able to work together to form a coalition and actually get a government together in the Netherlands is yet to be seen. But we're also seeing other political reactions in other places in Europe and the Western world. The recent election of a very pro-Israeli libertarian president, rather eccentric man in Argentina. So the ripple effects, again, of this war and the marches, the pro-Hamas marches we've seen across the Western world, beginning to have an effect in Europe and in Latin America and in the United States. So not necessarily characterizing Wilder's election as good or bad. There are two sides to these coins, and so we're not defending, but we are reporting on these events, politically speaking, as they unfold. So as always, thanks for watching, and we'll continue to report to you as events continue to unfold in the Muslim world and in the Western world, and really this is a global thing now, so we're not just in the Middle East anymore. That is our wheelhouse, but we're all over the place. We're trotting the globe, so to speak, on Twitter almost every day. So keep up with us there. We would encourage everyone in the Maranatha Global community to please continue to pray for our teams on the ground. It's no secret that we have teams, field teams, working on the ground in Iraqi Kurdistan, in Israel, in northern Israel, who are working hard to provide relief to the IDF and to Israeli civilians there, displaced Israeli civilians, and to renovate bomb shelters. We would encourage everyone to pray and consider giving to our bomb shelter campaign. You can go to FAI.online/donate, and there's a button on that page where you can give to Israeli relief. Also getting ready to launch some exciting initiatives in Iraqi Kurdistan. Yours truly will be talking to you soon about that. And so please stay tuned. We are still on the ground everywhere we were before in the Middle East, and we're not leaving. And we believe that Jesus has called us to be where we are, to be his light and salt to the people we're called to serve. And we appreciate your prayerful financial support. And we're ready to move forward, yoked together. Hold the rope. We love you all. Blessings to you, and Maranatha.